Hey everybody, PDA Turner, executive producer and host of your Breakdown Show. Let me move this microphone out of the way. I'm not even sure that it's working. I'm still battling technical issues. I've got a new thing to go with the new thing, and I'm just going to have to try some other new things. Equipment issues. What are you going to do about it? Anyhow, I thought I would jump in here while Bill works on trying to get himself all online and set up and being able to bring Bill Mankins to you. If you don't know Bill, he's been on the show a couple of times before. I don't know why I'm still trying to hook this camera up, but I'm going to try. Anyhow, he's been on the show a couple of times in the past, and he and I talk a lot about the situation in Afghanistan and Iraq where we worked and what it takes to get these things right. Because look, Iraq didn't go very well. Frankly, the whole Arab Spring thing was botched, and Afghanistan was botched. So if we're going to go to places, which apparently we always are because we're in a lot of places, how do we get better at this? How do we get better at going to overseas locations where there's completely different cultures, completely different languages, completely different dependence on religion? There's not enough of anything. How do we go and do these things better? You can say, well, we're not going to do that. We're just going to go fight China or whatever it's going to be. And that's all well and good. Until we start doing that, the things we do are go overseas and partner with nations, whether it's Jordan or we send people to Burma, Pakistan, all over the place, right? All over the world we go, but we don't seem to get how to partner better, how to create better outcomes. And so one of the things that Bill and I talk about is how do you develop these people that have the skills to go and reliably, if not perform better, how do you evaluate the performance so that you have someone external to the organization who's able to say, hey, these things don't appear to be working. What do we want to do about that? And these are the situations that we're faced with when we deploy is that, I'll go to a village, look around. Hey, what's here? What's working? What's not working? Oh my gosh, most of it isn't working. Well, now what are we going to do? Well, we're going to change this aspect or that aspect of what the problem is and go from there. We don't really even do that. We look at it and go, that'll be good enough. We're leaving. And the next unit comes in. So there's several confounding factors when we deploy. One of them is these 1-year deployments, right? You don't have the ability to build capacity. But it's worse than that because the deployments, every time you deploy, you probably do a different job each time you deploy. So you start to, think about whatever job it is that you do. How long does it take to become excellent at it? And I mean like professional, not just, okay, I can do the job, but I know everything about the job. Does it take a year? Does it take 6 months? Does it take 5 years? What does it take? Well, when you deploy, you are focused on half, I'm being kind, let's just be honest, a third of what you're supposed to do. And you never get to really develop this competence that you need to develop to work in overseas places. And so you deploy for a year, and for maybe 4 months, you start to be able to understand the elements of what you might have to do, right? But again, a third of your attention is focused on this part of the mission. The rest of it is focused on something else. Then all of a sudden, you end up like, hey, I'm leaving. And you never come back to that region. You also never come back in that capacity again with the military. So one of the things that Bill and I were great at doing is we would deploy and we would go to a place and we'd be able to stay there long enough to develop some real capacity, some understanding of the people, some partnerships, some relationships. And then our partners from the military side or State Department, whoever it was we were encountering, they would rotate in and rotate out at a pace that was unsustainable to be able to actually accomplish the mission because you don't develop any proficiency. And then if you ever saw that person again, they would be in a completely different role. Maybe they were in a staff role. Maybe they were a planner. Maybe they didn't even go outside the wire ever. Maybe they were in command, but you wouldn't see them in that role again. And so they never even get to develop a true mastery of the topic of working overseas. They go overseas a lot. They're proficient at being in the military and being overseas, but the ability to reliably go anywhere and take on any task is greatly diminished because they don't develop mastery. And that's one of the things that I think Bill, John Green, Rich Leday, Will Hardy, and I all talk about is how do you develop a reliable, deployable person in these capacities. Hey, by the way, here comes Bill Mankins. Bill's on the show now. And I was just kind of filling some time while we work on our technical issues. Hey, Bill. Say,
Hey, Pete. How you doing?
I'm great. Say, this is Bill Mankins, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
This is Bill Mankins, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
So I've been thinking a lot about you heard me talking a little bit about this lack of ability to focus on the thing that you have to do. You're going to go on a mobile train team, a MIT, in any kind of form or capacity, right? And you're going to go teach and train locals. But you still have to do PowerPoint slides. You still have to do briefings. You still have to do, leadership, development, mentoring, all these other things. So maybe a third of your capacity is directed at something. And then your training to get you to this point was probably 10% of what you actually need, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
So you're completely unprepared. You don't have the ability to do it very long. And then you get to do it for about 4 months where you're maybe not completely screwing up. Right. I mean, you're just such a rookie. And then you come back the next time. And if you're on a MIT, you're running the MIT, or you're working on a completely different aspect, and it's a completely new job set. Couple that with the institutional amnesia we have with these repeated deployments and completely ignoring everything that happened. No one knows the immediate history of their unit 5 units back. Right. Everybody thinks they did great. And they have we're drunk. And then, so we're not any good at the job. We don't remember what happened before us. And we all think we did a great job.
Yeah, it's a systematic problem for sure in terms of the way deployments work and training works and the HR system. And yeah, it's a big issue, a very big issue.
Bill's a champion. He's not feeling well today, but he still popped in because we agreed to do this. This is an important topic. The Afghanistan topic is huge. We know today, still, well after the projected withdrawal date, there are Americans with an unknown number in front of that. Like, is it 100? Is it 500? We just don't know. There are allied people that they consider valuable, whether they're citizens or their own visa holding people that they want to get back. We have our own visa holding people that we're trying to get back. And then we have people that, because we didn't turn the visa spigot on early enough, that are people that we would love to have here via a visa, but don't have that yet. And so that's a whole different population. Can you give us kind of an overview without getting it? And we should also say this too. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that require a level of sensitivity. So we're not going to talk too specifically about any one place or any one person, but can you kind of give us an overview of what you've seen as you've worked on these problems?
Yeah. The general one that's, Afghanistan's back now in the media, obviously, because of not just the withdrawal, but the way of method of withdrawal and the aftermath of what's the resulting consequences of using that particular method to withdraw. Basically, you've got a long time, almost 20 years of the United States being there and working there and developing relationships with local people. And of those people, there's different categories. But we help set up a government and help things run there. And you've got individuals who worked for example, the Department of Defense, some that worked directly for and were paid by the Department of Defense, some worked for the State Department, some worked for contracting companies that the State Department hired or DOD hired to do anything from security to, when a journalism program comes out and says, hey, we want to run the news, and State Department funds Voice of America, right? And you've got a correspondent who's there, and they're employed by an Afghan company who's paid by Voice of America. One of the issues right now is, okay, so the government that we were supporting collapsed, and the Taliban take over, and what now? You can't evacuate the whole country, so you got some really hard decisions about who do you let leave? Well, I shouldn't say who do you let leave. Who do you want to let into the United States? And specifically, that's one question. And then who do you want to help get out of Afghanistan that may not be coming to the United States, maybe going somewhere else that's safer for them, given what they may have done. And so some of these, just as a brief example, you got people who are active soldiers. So think of the equivalent of the Afghan CIA, right, or the Afghan military. So our mere institutions, their counterparts in Afghanistan. When a new regime takes over, you can imagine those are very much viewed as enemies, right? And so what's happening right now is Taliban's, to a large degree, cleaning house of the former intelligence service and tracking those folks down and tracking them. And the same thing with the certain elements of the Afghan army. That's kind of clear, and I would argue that that's relatively a normal process, as horrific as it is. It's not uncommon or unexpected. With this particular regime, the difference is it's an added challenge. Is not only are they saying, okay, let's help get out certain interpreters or certain other military personnel, but you got journalists, you got people that we funded academic-wise, for example, who brought to the United States, put them in Fulbright so they could go back and become faculty and teachers or become newscasters and news anchors. And so there's a lot of training and education we gave, but then the issue here is the culture differences between the Taliban and the former regime that was propped up by us. And so as a result, you've got a lot of women judges, which was totally an anthem to Afghanistan, everything counter to the culture that existed. And female senators that we had said, by constitution that we helped set up, that said, well, you have to have a certain percentage. It's this, a quota, effectively. And so as a result, you've got some women and families and people that are non-military folks that are in hyper dangerous conditions because they've been on social media, other ways that 20 years ago or 30 years ago or during the Vietnam War period when you're trying to evacuate people, these same kind of things happened. But the difference is with social media, it's a lot easier to track all those people down all over the country because there's a record of it, a digital record of it that's very easy to identify and track. So any dissident or anybody who is, after 15 years of the Taliban being gone, comes on TV and starts talking about how terrible they are and whatnot, those people are now targeted in ways that would not have been as big of a deal 30 years ago. It's a big deal now. And so part of the sorting system that's a problem is who do you want to have 40,000 people be refugees? You want to have 1 million? Because there's a lot of people who are going to have, a lot of people are going to live a life they don't want to have lived, right? And it would have been a better regime. But then there's the people who are most likely going to die if the Taliban gets their hands on them. So making a very clear line in a place that's very gray and muddied is a difficult spot to be in.
Yeah. Try drawing a line in a muddy lake. It just doesn't work. One of the things that I think we need to address is, you said the word schwack, and what you're talking about is murdering, hunting down and murdering somebody, not as a target of opportunity, not because they're in a rival gang, but because this person cannot live in this regime. So they're going to go and find them and not just gently kill them. They're going to horribly kill them and use them as a message to everybody else in the area. That's so right. let's not slow down for schwack. And then and I'm going to say this, you don't have to say this, but for as much as we want to talk about so-and-so's a Nazi, we just created a Nazi regime where they're going to go out and they're going to hunt down and they're going to ethnically cleanse an area because they don't want those. So the Taliban doesn't want those people there. So we created that, and we own that part of that problem because we failed to do our job well. And so we've released this evil element, and like always, our hands are all over it because we seem to love to screw these things up. So when we talk about schwacking and understanding who's there, the Taliban is they're not going to treat people well. So we also have this problem of who's going to get out, what country they're going to get to. How about citizens of different countries that were aligned with us, and trying to get out? I mean, it's just a mess, man. I mean, there's people that legitimately need to be out of there, and then there's the ones where like, what are we going to do? Because anybody we don't take, they're probably right. They're probably going to get killed.
Yeah, and there's so many complications, dimensions, to the issue there. As you said about other countries, you got a lot of the coalition folks. People who may have gotten citizen. Okay, here's a typical problem. I can think of 2 families right now off the top of my head. The dads worked for U.S. government. The dads, over the course of multiple years, came over and got their blue passport citizenship visas, right? The wife and kids are still in Afghanistan because at the time, well, I mean, it's their government, right? So you're equivalent of a CIA or a special forces general, right? You're living in Afghanistan, your family's living in Afghanistan, and you apply for a passport and you get one. So there's a challenge there of, well, when one member is an American citizen and the others aren't, there's a normal multi-year process you can go through to make the other family members citizens. Well, what happens when you don't have time, because time is the enemy here, to go through the normal process? And people say, well, you can leave, but only if you're a passport holder. And that's what's happened right now. So, I mean, I don't know very many fathers that would feel real good about leaving their wives and kids, right, in a country like that, with a leader, I should say, under a regime like that, and staying here. So, but then how do you get them out? Because if they go back and try to go home with them, they're a huge target. Almost, when they're actively looking for them. And remember, we've got biometrics on all these people because so it's not like they don't own that system and can easily identify those people. Um, and then the other issue is, so you've got that a family where half are and half aren't. I'm talking, not talking the cousins and third cousins and the like. I'm talking immediate husband, wife, children. You got another one where you may have two another country as well, like say the German situation, in which somebody's got residency equivalent to like a green card or a working permit, right? But they don't have a passport from that country. Or maybe their spouse does, but they don't, or the kids do. We got another situation where we've got everybody in the family has passports and or green cards, but right now the Afghan government, the Taliban, has just said we're only going to allow passports, not green cards. Well, then they switch another day, and we know they've been able to be getting families out with a green card. Well, just yesterday they had some that were not allowed to leave. So not only are the standards themselves difficult if they were constant, but the standards themselves are constantly changing. And it's going to get even worse when the Taliban starts. Right now, they are they're allowing people to leave on the former government's passport. Well, when a new government takes over, it's really normal you now have a passport to a country that basically no longer exists. Now, internationally, other countries may recognize that passport and choose to recognize it for a while. But as soon as the Taliban regime gets recognized by the international community, then you get a real question about, well, who has the authority to issue those new passports? That's clearly the Taliban government. Who has the ability to recognize old passports instead of making them stay in the country and get new ones? And you got to go get those from the Taliban, and therefore walk in and be submitted to potentially them capturing you, right? So there's a whole group of people. The biggest people we're trying to protect are ones that are actively being hunted, and so they can't do that. And then you've got to either cross the border illegally or do some other kind of controversial step, because there's not a way to do it the quote right way. Muddy waters. I think you're on mute, Pete.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. The quote right way. Yeah. There's no right way though in Afghanistan. So, we don't want to cause a brain drain, but of course anybody with a brain that stays is likely not to have a brain shortly after. So we have these multiple problems. How about the person who believed, like, okay, yeah, the Taliban was horrible. I was a little kid. I remember that stuff. But now, as an adult, 20 years later, let's say this kid was 7 years old when we get there. Now they're almost 30 years old. They've got a family. They had no intention of coming to America. Maybe they even had a thriving business, selling ice cream or fixing trucks or whatever it was. And now they look around and they're like, oh my God, whatever they did, even if they didn't really do anything directly with the Americans, they have every right to believe that this is going to be a horrible situation. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, people left Czechoslovakia on purpose. People try to leave Romania, and Romania and Russia and all these, I mean, it wasn't easy to get out. And these weren't people that were even aligned with us. So there's I don't know, half of the population of Afghanistan in some way or form wants to get the hell out. Yeah. And the longer they're forced to stay there, the longer it's unstable, the more instability is sown, the more these things fester. Mm-hmm. It's not just a money problem. It's a dangerous problem for everybody. I mean, we were talking the other day, I had Eric Kleinsmith on the show. He used to be my commander in Bosnia. Mm-hmm. We were talking about the resurgence of terrorism, especially because in that area now, it's like no holds barred. Until we know otherwise, it's no holds barred. Yeah. And Tbilisi, which is probably the closest European city, maybe there's one closer, but it's not that far. It's 1,000 miles. You can get in a car and drive there in a day. And now you're in Europe, and 1,000 miles from Tbilisi is everything. everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be in Paris in a couple of days with really nefarious intent, and have nothing, have left your country, and effect left nothing to go to nothing.
Yeah.
And we've not. There's a cost to leaving, I guess is what I'm trying to say,
Hmm.
and that cost is going to be more death and destruction.
Yeah. Yeah, there sure is. I'm working with a couple handfuls of folks who are dealing with this issue right now, of various kinds. Some were former military, some intel, some academic, a few journalists, that kind of thing. People in that sort of those categories. And uh, yeah, I mean, when you think about everything you own and what you've got invested and where you're at and what you can fit in basically a backpack, maybe drag along suitcase if you're lucky. Um, and reduce those things of value to a small amount and take and start over. It's a big, there's a lot to that. That's a scary deal. At the same time, if you're really, if you really are scared for your life, there's no choice to be made. I mean,
No,
I can't tell you how many videos I've seen in the last, I don't know, 2 weeks of guys getting captured and literally having their throats cut open in a ritual. Not really beheadings. They're not cutting their heads off. They bleed them out right across the neck. The Taliban are just, particularly with Panjiris and stuff, that are being captured. And so it's brutal. And it's definitely designed to terrorize the population into submission. And it's pretty effective, quite frankly. I mean, when you think about the fact that like 75 armed guys are managing to hold 34 million people in a country, there's a reason. When you're willing to go to lengths that other people won't go, people will submit. And they are.
they are. What is it like now? I mean, there's almost no news about it now because it's just not a relevant story. But what is the situation like in Afghanistan as far as what you know from your contacts?
But good and bad. So I think that's important to note. I mean, it's easy. So without knowing, obviously in the audience who's listening to this, so the listener group, you're going to have a spectrum of folks. So I think it's important to have this as I should pause here for a second and give a caveat here. So Taliban, brutal. I definitely would not want to live under that regime any day of the week, right? Spent several years fighting that organization. That said, they're not necessarily the biggest, baddest boogeyman that's ever existed, where they're completely an anthem to everything that you or I would like, right? Quite frankly, I've been actually surprised to a large degree at how, for the Taliban standards, we'll say merciful and calm things have been. Don't mistake what I'm saying to say they've been merciful. I'm not. What I'm saying is, based on their previous standards that they had done, with not blinking an eye with executions and horrific things, like they really toned that down to still doing those horrific things, but to a very narrow band of society, as opposed to writ large, number one. And they're going to do things in an old school way, like they just said a couple of days ago that cutting off of hands is going to return and that kind of thing to deter crime. But when you're 75,000, that's horrific, right? It's terrible, no question. But when you're 75,000 guys trying to maintain order over 35 million people, you can't do that by asking people politely. Like, that's just not. No government works like that. And so there's a degree of severity that's going to happen there. I say all this to say, what's it like there right now? I think people are. I'll tell you two stories that will illustrate it. One, I had a guy that I'm working with. He's a young guy, early 20s. Okay, so he basically has no memory. He's never seen a Talib in his life.
Right.
Talib, for those of you who don't know, so Talib means student. It's a religious student, and Taliban is meaning like the students. If you want to think of it as a Taliban as an organization that started out kind of like a little tongue-in-cheek. Let's say it's a seminary of Southern Baptists, right? So the most radical side you could think of, seminary students who are just on fire for what they're doing. That was those guys, with guns and by force taking over country and then instituting their belief set to the country. So Talib, one of those. So this guy had never even seen a single Talib before because of where he lived. He lived in Kabul, so he lived in this massive city, which is like living in downtown Manhattan, and you had never gone to, say, I don't know, Arkansas, right? And never been in a rural place with old Ricky and his buddy Joey and, fishing and such. Never seen anybody like that. And so, when we were moving him from one place to another in town to keep him safe. And, he first time he saw him, of course, they're all over Kabul and take over. And he's just like petrified. I mean, it's like a Martian's landing. He just had never seen these people. They look terrifying. They are terrifying. And, they weren't doing anything. I mean, they're walking down the streets, they're just policing, but you're seeing these people, they're totally foreign, and you've heard stories about your whole life, and they're, terror. And it's interesting because another guy who had worked in the border areas, really rough places where I had spent time, had seen, grew up around these guys, right? And so you have two people, really. So this is equivalent to, and I'm being tongue in cheek, but it's somewhat true. It's like you've got the hillbilly who grew up in Appalachia, right beside the aristocrat who grew up in downtown Manhattan, and neither had the guy in the hillbilly had been both to his own hillbilly spot and right downtown Manhattan, and the guy in Manhattan had never been to Appalachia, and so all of a sudden he sees all these, we'll say, seminary students rolling into town, right, with their guns, and it's like the zombie apocalypse, and he's freaking out. This is a microcosm of sort of what it's like, in the sense of lots of people are really, really scared, and really scared for good reason. And it is terrifying. So I don't want to diminish it, but I also, because almost everyone doesn't have that much experience in Afghanistan, to realize that, and I'm not giving them praise, but I am saying, to be objective, I'm a little surprised that they're not as full throttle as what I thought they would be. And maybe that's because of the money and the recognition that they're holding out for. And once they get that, it's going to be throttled down. That's a debate. I don't know. This whole debate you hear on TV about, well, it's the new Taliban or the old Taliban. Well, I mean, come on. It's a little bit of both, right? They're different guys in one sense. It's a different generation of younger fighters, a different generation of people who grew up on social media at the beginning of when 9/11 happened, and all that cert part didn't exist. So they're seeing more than just what they saw in the madrasa by just having access to media and all kinds of other things. But, come on, the ideology is the ideology. So the whole premise and basis of the thing is the same. So I think you will see some minor differences. Well, we have seen that, but the major things are going to be the same.
The amount of people trying to get out, you have a sense for it at all? I mean, I get hit up with things all the time, and I do my best to put them into the machine and let you guys, there's more than one of you people doing what you're doing that I know. Mm-hmm. But who knows? It could be a fake, could be not a real person, could be a bad person, could be a real person that we need to get out. So I get the sense that if I'm still getting these things, there must be tens of thousands of people that are still desperately trying to get out, like right now, actively trying to leave.
Yeah. I don't want to harp on, in terms of numbers. That's a good question. I have no way to judge that, but I would say a pretty easy example would be the entire military, for the most part, right? I mean, these are all people who actively fought against the Taliban. Well, just take the size of the Afghan army. I mean, I don't know how many people that is, but it's a lot. It's not like it's 10,000, right? And that's just that. Then you take all the government people, right?
Oh, I mean,
if you were a U.S. senator and another country took over a country, do you think what do we do to the Nazi leadership, right? We executed most of the senior folks who were involved with Auschwitz and the like. So it's expected this is going to happen, and so those people are going to want to leave. And while it's easy to say, well, the foot soldiers are just following orders. Yeah, I mean, that didn't work so well at Nuremberg, right? So I don't think there's a very big argument to be made that we ourselves made, right, back then, which is if you are a soldier and you're supposed to do what you're told to do in chain of command, then yes, not just the generals and the senior leadership need to be evacuated, because the other guys, the foot soldiers, are equally identifiable. Those are the guys actually pulling the triggers, right? The low guys, not the senior leadership. And these are people that are easily targeted. Well, I mean, one of the big lessons to think about this, to me, that I've been thinking about a lot lately is what is thinking about what the implications are for our future involvement, right? And
Okay.
in planning ahead, like, look, just because in planning ahead, thinking about what it is that the United States is willing to trade off and what we should do for other countries and other peoples who are trying to set themselves up. There's a certain amount of risk that they have to take on because it's just that's it. It's part of the deal, right? I mean, not everybody can come to the United States. As much as that would be awesome, it's just basic math. It doesn't work. So without regard to talking about the details of immigration policy, the general idea is what percentage or what number, if things go south, are you willing to support? Because if, in any kind of good planning, you're not just planning, hoping for the best. And that's plan one, right? You should have multiple contingencies. And then what happens if we get down to Z? Are we gonna do? And as a critique of the administration, and not just this administration, although this one in particular, is thinking through those issues. Like the very fact that in 2008, like I got a guy who applied for an SIV. This is a special immigration visa, right? This is for the guys who are working specifically for DOD directly, right? People who put their lives and faces on the line, particularly interpreters going out and meeting with people and the like. Okay. The guy applied for that in 2008, and he just got his accepted 2 weeks ago. Think about that.
Yeah.
2008, and in 2021, he finally gets not accepted as an approved, a tracking number that says, "Thank you for applying. We're now tracking your application." So that's a pretty powerful indictment, I would argue, of the system, in that if you want it to work, then it needs to be designed like this, and it should take this much time. If you want or don't want it to work, then why even construct it to begin with? Because it's just smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
Or you had a good idea, and then it wasn't staffed and funded by Congress, whatever group had leadership at the time, empower the person, all that. So whatever the case is, we had one of the things about this whole mess is not thinking through, if it goes south, who do we want to allow in? And have we prepped that so it's completed before things go south, as opposed to waiting to try to do it afterwards? And was that accident due to incompetence, or was that intentional due to a desire to basically hang those folks out to dry? Neither of those answers are good, but it has to be one or the other, because there's nothing that's possible in between.
We should understand internationally too, and this is not apples to apples, but it's also not apples and oranges. Most countries have an entry criteria. If you want to come and you are a male and you have a master's degree, come on in. If you are a mom and you've got 2 boys, come on in. There's some kind of entry requirement because of our insane immigration policy. And this is not any administration. It's a national insanity with our immigration policy. We can't even get something simple like, who would we like? We can't even have the conversation about who would we say, oh, these would be good people to have come in as Americans.
Yeah.
I want people to immigrate here. I love it. I love immigration. The Next American's my favorite. I think they're all great. But we should act like that then, if that's what we're going to do. And it shouldn't take 10 plus years. Johnny Walker got his citizenship in just over 10 years. And he had a lot of influence, because he's a SEAL celebrity. 10 years, for a guy that was on more SEAL missions than any SEAL in Iraq, so we don't take that part of the mission seriously. And if pulling out of Afghanistan was going to be a real thing, whether it was the Trump plan or the Biden plan, the SIV faucet should have been turned on a lot longer. They should have just started rubber stamping things and making it, treating it seriously, and also being very clear, at least classified internally and to our coalition partners, we are actually leaving on or about this date, whatever the date is. Should it be in winter? Yeah, it should have been in wintertime. But if it was going to be by 9/11, we should have made that, because that stuff's said all the time. It's all rumor until you're like, no, really start pulling your people out,
Yeah.
And even then that causes problems. So
Yeah.
The lack of seriousness that we've approached these problems with. So when we do look at future operations or current operations, when we're in, I mean, where are we not? That's probably the shorter list, right? I mean, we're probably in over half of the countries, if not 2/3 of the countries, as a
Mhm.
as a force, not
Mhm.
just State Department people.
Yeah. Yeah, the immigration. I mean, this is this situation in Afghanistan is a subset of the overall immigration problem. I mean, you could see it on TV with the Haitians right now, but I mean, the Haitians is our new thing. Guatemalans were previous to that, leaving Guatemala through Mexico to come. And, you know, is it a problem that people want to come here? No, it's a wonderful thing. My goodness, it means we're doing better than other people, because otherwise they want to go someplace else, right? The very fact that people want to come here is, this is a place of amazing opportunity. Currently, right? And as a result, people want to migrate here. If you asked anybody, any of the Syrian refugees, and that was going on, or, you know, if you could choose any country in the world to go to, where would you want to migrate? Most of them would say here by far. Well, I mean, the challenge is you can't just let anybody. What numbers do you want to have come in that you can take care of, and take care of meaningfully, right? Because we, the collective, the actual taxpayer, are people who do that and manage that, right? It's not like it's some other entity, the government. The people do that, do taxes. And so there's a certain amount, right, that you can bring in financially and manage well. And there's a certain amount that you can culture-wise bring in without distorting or warping the mix, like you know, adding food coloring to a bucket of paint, right? There's if you add in too much, you're going to change the actual substance of the thing. So there's a rate or ratio. If you want to kind of keep your core culture what it is, a certain amount allows sort of acculturation to occur, and the country to roughly stay identifiable, if you will. Well, what that number is of course hard to arrive at, and I'm not claiming in any way that I certainly know what that is. But it's something to think about. And I think, to me, the immigration issue, to me personally, this usually falls on one of two things, which is either you keep them out, we don't want them, xenophobia types on one end, on the other end's there should be no borders, everybody should be allowed to come, and why do we even have borders and checkpoints and security? And, you know, it's this sort of like iron fist on the right to the hippy dippy on the left that makes, and neither of these things are rational or make sense whatsoever. So, you know, that in between of, well, who do you really want to come in? I mean, it's a microcosm, but if you ask yourself in some ways, it's like, well, okay, would you want an unlimited number of people to come in and able to eat at your house and, or, you know, raid your refrigerator and stay in your rooms? Or would you want to kind of control how many people can come in based off of a capacity? And not only how many, but what kind, right? There's a certain type or kind you'd want to have in your home. And that may vary depending on whose home it is, right? Just like every country is going to say, well, we would rather have these kind. And another country say, oh, we'd take these kind. Whatever those kinds are and the descriptions about those, I think that's important to think about. And the idea, to me, that's just beyond absurd, is that somehow you wouldn't want to know who's in your country. Don't make no mistake about it. You got criminal elements, MS-13, you got terrorist groups and drug trafficking. I mean, every kind of illegal element you can think of that is, in fact, consistently moving across, you know, borders and seeking to do horrific, terrible things. So you got to have a place, a mechanism for screening and evaluating people coming in and out and doing that. The question becomes, you know, how do you do it efficiently? How do you do it? I hate the word humane, but we'll just say as friendly, right, as possible. Unnecessarily violent or difficult is one thing, but you know, the idea that you want to have your doors locked and not have people just walk in your house whenever they want, uninvited, is kind of a big deal. It's pretty basic.
Yeah.
And with the Afghan thing, and this is where it's interesting right now, you've got, you know, you got 200,000 rolling across the border, like every well, I don't know what the rate is, but it's a lot. Okay,
It's a lot.
And you got the number that with Afghanistan, we're talking about people that very clearly, right, have unquestionably, like, I know this guy, I personally vouch for this guy, I worked with this guy for 4 years, I know him, I know his family, and you know that. Is very different than, hey, some guy shows up on the Texas border from God knows where, and we don't know anything about him, and now we got to try to vet somebody from some who knows where, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the interesting challenges here is there's the standard rate, whatever it is that immigration policy says we're going to let this number in per year, right? I think it's Congress that sets that. And for contingencies, that's the norm. And then there's this thing just happened, the Syrian refugee crisis, or this one, right? That we're going to say, okay, we're going to allow this abnormal for this period of time from this particular place to occur. And that's I think the big question right now is how many Afghans specifically are going to be let in. What's the standard and the screening process going to be for letting them in, and who are we going to draw that line between who on their side, who is in threat and wants to leave that we could help, and on our side is who's good for us and that we would like to help out, and where do those two things align, right? Because let's face it, there's a lot of countries that people go to. I had a family the other day. It was like I said, you feel like you're in danger. Yes, I'm scared to death of the Taliban. Okay, if you could live in Uganda for the rest of your life, but you'd be free from the Taliban, would you do that? Well, no. Okay, well then there's your answer right there. The truth is, if where you're at, I mean, look, I love this country. This is where it is my home, right? Bleed and die for this thing. But if someone said, you can't live here, I have a very clear pecking order of places that I would live if this was taken away from me and I had to go somewhere else, right? And if your life's in danger and you're worried about getting your head cut off or being executed or your kids getting hands chopped off and stuff, like, come on. You're not going to go, well, I'll just go ahead and stay here because I don't want to live in Uganda. I mean, living's better than dying, right? And so there's some degree of rationality I think has to come to that too, which is what degree of danger are you really in and what are you talking about? Because not everyone's in that kind of danger. Life might suck, but it's not so dangerous that you'd live in some place that you just don't like or it's too hot. So the right way to screen that, I don't know, but it needs to happen.
Right. When we look at everything that's happened with Afghanistan, and I'll say just the complete botching of the retreat, all of these problems that we create, and now we have to create places like Uganda where we're like, can we store some Afghans here?
Mm-hmm.
We have to make these other deals that if we had just done the work ahead of time and pre-planned some of this stuff. And look, it's not possible to pre-plan everything, but this is what happens. And you have this, we take a bad situation and add Frankenstein parts to it. Like now there's this dead floppy arm over in Uganda that's going to, require some kind of attention, right?
Yeah.
It frustrates the crap out of me, and I look at Congress, Secretary Austin and General Miley just, testified. Nothing's going to happen. Neither of those dudes are going to be held accountable for anything. They'll both retire and they'll be fine. Nothing's going to happen to anybody, as if there were no mistakes at all. Secretary Austin oversaw the failure of 2 major withdrawals, right? At some point, somebody did something wrong. I don't know what we do. We're not going to get this stuff right. We don't want to be isolationists, but how can there be no accountability? How can President Biden, and I'm not making a political statement, how can he say, I accept responsibility without any culpability, without any consequence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. And I would say that regardless of whether it was Republican or Democrat that made that
absolutely
choice. Like it's just I can say this with absolute objectivity, and I just have never seen in my lifetime. Okay, so I'm mid-40s. Like I've never seen in my lifetime not a single, but a series of decisions, right, of how to do something internationally as bad as this. So the Bay of Pigs was before my time, right, and about a decade. But so I don't have no memory of it. But obviously being a scholar and like reading and studying about it in that way, sure. I look at this and go, botched mess that causes international conundrum. I would put this in that is far actually exceeding that, because there's a lot of reasons I won't go into, but anyway, this is in my opinion the biggest, easily the biggest failure in the last 50 years, maybe even maybe even going back before that, maybe even 100.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it is really, really bad. And there's a whole series of things like, when you see the train wreck, it's usually not one thing that caused the entire train wreck. It's usually a series of bad decisions that in accumulation caused the bad train wreck. And, you could pick it apart and talk about Bagram, or you could talk about the immigration thing we just talked about, and why weren't these SIV things taken care of over the last 15 years, instead of just the last 3 weeks.
I want to just pause right there. We've been talking about these visas the entire time. You, me, Dan Crenshaw, all kinds of people have been saying we've got to get these people out, be prepared for this, and it was completely ignored. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. Well, and then just in general, like I think I shouldn't say everybody, but I mean most people who really had a decent handle on Afghanistan have been there multiple times and have worked with the Afghan army and worked with the government and had fought actual Taliban, right? It is pretty clear to me back in 2009 that this was going to happen at some point.
Right.
Like there's just no way. You could just see in the general battle of it's hard. I hesitate to say this because there's a lot to unpack here that we don't have time for, but in some, there is a distinction to some degree of who wants it more. And I can tell you the people who are willing to blow themselves up and committed to achieving their objectives versus the people who are trying to save their lives and not willing to make that level of sacrifice. I mean, it's clear who's going to win given a long enough period of time. And not only a key part of that is not only willing to sacrifice themselves, but I hate to say it, it's just true. It's a key part of leadership is the willingness to sacrifice other people. And that is, you have a regime who's willing to sacrifice their own foot soldiers like pawns without blinking an eye. You got our leadership.
You're talking about us or them?
Them, yeah. No, them. And our leadership and our it's democracy, right? We just, I mean, my goodness, and I don't say this lightly. I've talked to dozens of friends that have died.
Right.
When you look at winning the political objectives and you want to talk about winning your way of life, people say that and so blasé, it barely has any meaning anymore. But I'm talking about real, no joke, like your way of life. That the freedom doesn't come free joke and all that, right? I mean, that is real. And if you're not willing to pay the price to have that, and what I mean is you pay it and other people pay it, and you're not willing to dictate to other people, you'll pay this also so we can live like that, then the community's going to collapse when somebody else who has a stronger will comes along and is willing to force their will upon you. It's just the nature, it's the law of the jungle. And here you've got it in a way that Dublin did not relent whatsoever in their desire. You've got a population that, had various feelings that were different than what the United States really perceived. You have a small number of people in the cities and urban areas who bought in and wanted and were ready for kind of westernization, who kind of got, they were the leading edge, that just the rest of the country wasn't there, and the will wasn't there to you got to want this bad enough to leave that. And if you're in the middle and you're like, well, I still like this, but you gotta have enough people moving that want to make that move and sacrifice to get it. And anybody watched most of the ANA battles, like you got a handful of warriors that were on our side. But I can tell you right now, anybody who's ever fought Taliban, like guys there's always exceptions, right? Both sides have, cowards and both sides have heroes, but hands down, the Taliban in general was full of true warriors, right? And most of the time, I would say the ANA had, 1 in 20 warriors, and the rest were just bodies, people getting a paycheck, doing a job, and doing the best they can. But let's be honest, if you don't have a warrior, like, you can't fight. You just can't do it.
That's not any different than Civil War, though, right? I mean, we had guys that were there, like, hey, I'm a farmer. I'm here, but not anything more than that. The other thing is when you talk about being all the way in, we push this female agenda. We send money to Middle Eastern or Islamic countries talking about not just gay rights, but trans identity.
Oh, yeah.
these things are not sustainable. Uh, Forget the fact that that money is sent somewhere and turned into whatever it's going to be turned into. But we're inserting ourselves into a situation we have no business inserting ourselves into, which will almost universally result in the opposite of the benefit that we're trying to create. I'm hypercritical of people that think that you can just go to Afghanistan and empower females. I mean, that's why I wrote a peer-reviewed paper about it,
Yeah,
because it's
that's right.
inappropriate to go do these things. So we have this desire to go do something, but we don't have the desire to actually do the damned work or to spend the money to do it properly, and not by sending it over there,
Yeah.
but to actually like pay you and me to train people and go, this is how you do this. I mean, a human collector, tactical human collector should spend as much time overseas as possible so that they
Hmm.
can adapt to any environment and learn how to think on their feet. But we don't take it seriously. They spend time in a damn motor pool doing nothing. Uh, there's people who make policy, get it wrong. People who make take theory. How many times have you talked to someone? This is my question. I'm done ranting now. Here comes the question. How many times have you talked to someone who has all of the credentials in the world, but none of the experience? And so they talk about these lovely theoretic things and strategic wins that they want, but they have no earthly clue how to actually accomplish it.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. We're like, you have to align these tribes. Well, how the hell are you going to do that?
Yeah. 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 I mean, if it were that easy, right? You would say that even parallels with our domestic politics, right? It's like, oh, well,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
If you take away the capacity to gerrymander lines, so you tell me how you're going to go ahead and align the stereotypical, like I don't know, the urban transvestites, transsexual, trans anything, you name it, right? With the rural dip in the lip, Billy Bob, right? Is folks where I'm from. Like, I think that these groups have, as even a group, but then has some kind of capacity to have a completely unified agenda across all lines of questions quickly is crazy. You might get them to agree on a given issue, right? But agreeing on an issue is not a basis for a system of government. So, great, we'd all like to have roads. That's nice, but how do you want to pay for them? Where do they want to go? Who can travel on them? And not only that, just leave the road issue. How does that affect issues of abortion and transsexual rights and my issues of like whether women can be seen in public or not and have to wear a burqa? Like, these things are completely unrelated, and so I see all the time that issue of, yes, here is the end state that would be nice, the utopia, right? The thing of, if all things were possible, here's what we would like. Then, okay, now here's what the pieces are actually on the board. What can we make out of the pieces that actually exist here? That's a different question, and one that oftentimes, I mean, I think this is a big flaw. You probably heard me harp on this a million times. It's a big thing of mine with the education system that we have here, because education is a big part of what I do. And when you're talking about, think about debates that we have with people in our own. If you are a whatever you want to call your intersectionality, whatever it is. You want to take anything, a male, female, you want to do it by race, you want to do it by gender, you want to do it whatever. You talk about people who are exactly in your quote demographics, right? You still got massive debates within those groups about the way things ought to be and how they should be, much less across those groups, right? And that's really no different, of course, abroad. And one of the things I think is really difficult for people here and anywhere in the world is, if you're only around people like yourself, you live in zip code X, it's consisted mostly of people who are like this economic group or this racial group or this, whatever. And you haven't been many other places. And I don't mean as a tourist, right? I mean like live in another place, because there's a big difference between being a tourist in the car or on a bus, watching people drive by, or going on the European vacation in the summer, with family and eating croissants and getting some uh, little thin pancakes. But going and actually living in a place, right, gives you time and perspective to really get to understand differences in people. It's like living when you go to college your freshman year, you gotta live, or used to live with a new person that's not a family member in a strange place for an
Right.
entire year. The whole purpose is the growing process that comes from this forced function. When you can pick your roommate, it's your best friend. Like, you don't learn anything. You're doing what you know, right? And I think this, from an education standpoint of what you just said, is learning all of these things from these different people. If you go to a place like Afghanistan, it's really that different, right? You go and live in, say, rural Cambodia, or you go and live in Zambia. Like, it's very different than going to Stockholm. Even there is different. Okay, so it's better than not, right? But that's
Right.
also the same true if you grow up in Appalachia and you go to LA. It is culture shock. Like, it's massively different. You go down to hang out on Venice Beach, that's culture shock for damn near 95% of the country. And so spending time, I think, from a learning about other people's standpoint about what's possible in a given place, you got to know how those people think and how they
Yeah.
believe. What their mind can conceive as being acceptable or too much. And most of the people, unfortunately, who are in senior, this is one of my contingencies, most of the people who are in senior decision making positions. So read your National Security Council as a whole, right? Especially the principals too, but National Security Council as a whole. You want to have one of those positions where you decide. We're talking about the Secretary of State. You talk about these folks, and you say how many of these people. And you can look back. This is some work I've done myself for research. You look back and you look at the National Security Council and all those positions, and look at the number of people who have actually lived in a non-Western foreign country, much less have taken the time to learn to speak one of those languages and really understand that culture, right? It's 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 not. It is so minuscule. It's a joke. And when you think about, these are the people who are making decisions about what we should do and how we should interact in the world, yet they don't have much experience living and interacting with the people in the world other than Western educated elites at Harvard and Yale and Princeton. When they come here, oh, and I went to Oxford and I was there with the Bangladeshi's prime minister's son, so like I'm connected. Yeah, for sure, but that doesn't mean you know squat about what a rural Bangladeshi
Right.
thinks,
Yeah.
right? Because you're completely different cultures.
Urban and rural, that matters. And then I would say that there's this other layer, especially in Afghanistan, but in a lot of places where what you picture urban, this is this is way beyond that. I mean, you go out, what I'm saying, like
Yeah,
10 miles off the main route, which is basically the only road in Afghanistan, 10 miles off that route, that's not urban.
no,
That's its own country. I mean, I don't know how to describe it, because if you haven't been there, this is not a place where cars drive around. This is not a place where waste management is even possible. Like when people say, "Oh, the Chinese are going to go in there and they're going to run a mine." No, that's not okay. Maybe eventually someday if they have the will to stay, but you would have to have so much infrastructure built in place, protect it from people that are like, "I'll take that.
yeah,
I'll kill this guy. How about we don't want you here? We're going to kill you, and we don't even live here. We live miles and miles away."
yeah.
These extra elements. You're so right about this. I also wanted to say this too. Tomorrow I'll have Alex Vindeman on the show,
Okay,
and one of the things I want to ask him is so when you see things written about him, and God bless all the press, and they don't know what they're doing, but they often write that he's an expert on Ukraine. And okay, in some circles he is by position, but should a lieutenant colonel on the National Security Council be making foreign policy decisions? And this is not, I'm going to ask him this because I'm not attacking. I'm curious, like, is that an O5's job to be
yeah,
doing that? And I would say, wow, really? By exception, maybe. Okay. And in his case, he was born there, was there for a long time as a kid, has some really special knowledge. So maybe in his case, yeah, he's a go-to guy.
yeah,
But far too many times, like you're saying, people that they've read books, they took
yeah,
a class, and I'm undermining what they've done, but they haven't been there. They have
yeah,
not truly been there.
yeah. Yeah, it's a big issue. One of the things that I'm working on in that regard is looking at the way that people get into different positions who can make decisions like this, and what their uh, the current and historical pipelines have been to say, what's the minimum amount of requirements someone has to have for this position, and expertise, right? And one of the challenging things about that, in general, is there's usually things that are done in a dichotomy of either I specialize in management, or I'm a specialist, so you either are this route of, I don't know, I'm just good at leading people and organizing stuff and managing things. It doesn't really matter what they are, because what I do is organize, right? And then there's a person who's like, no, I know about, I don't know, whatever subset of specialty it is, like aviation. I'm an aviation guy, so by God, I'm an expert in aviation. I'm the best pilots in the world. I'm this and that, test pilot. I do that, or I'm this engineer who does this or this or this.
Right.
And there's usually in most organizations a break where people, if you are an engineer and you go up to an engineering company, there's a point where you either continue to specialize in engineering, or you're an engineer, but now you manage the teams, and then you just get more and more teams and move higher up in the chain to where you're organizing. And one of the unfortunate things about this is the people who get good at managing and organizing move up without the expertise. So they're good at organizing a ship, but the knowledge expertise that it takes to make some of those decisions is actually over here, somewhere over here, over somewhere else. And that person, and most organizations have this problem, our U.S. government does too, is the specialist who actually knows about how to make those decisions is often can't get to that position at the senior level, or is just brought in to consult, but doesn't have the power, because they don't own the position, to actually decide. So this is where you get this debate right now of, well, did the military, did the military not say you should leave troops there or we should withdraw? Because Biden says, nope, it was unanimous agreement. Others say, no, we said, don't do this, leave 3,500. Well, it can't be one or the other. It's I mean, both. It's got to be one or the other. So nothing is more full, right? And that's the authority of the National Security Council. You've got, everyone's allowed to have opinions. Everyone's allowed to have perspectives. What do? We consult the experts, but then the person who's the decision maker is ultimately the one who decides, and they can ignore all the experts. Like, they have that position.
Yeah.
Also, why it's so important with the elected officials and then the appointed National Security Council principles of getting the right people to do it. The right people in those spots who actually have the knowledge to make those decisions, and the people who have the humility to defer to the experts and rely on the people that do whatever it is for a living full time.
Yeah.
And, we have this issue with ambassadors as appointees too, right? I mean, the State Department's full of this, where, well, I'm a donor and I donated this. Okay, so you're going to be the ambassador to Romania, or you're going to go there, ambassador to Albania. There are very few countries, a few, the big ones, China, Russia, where the ambassador actually has to be like legit. But most of the people who run the State Department aren't. You don't have to work 30 years in the State Department to become an ambassador. You got to donate a certain amount of money, and that's what you get. There's a few people who work their way up and become ambassadors, but a sizable percentage are donors. And I think that's interesting, because then you look at some countries and you wonder why the decisions to understand about what's happening there and what should happen are not quite as on point as they should be.
I would love to see some kind of ELO rating like they have for chess, and you can reach a certain level when you show a competence, where you can perform or outperform your peers. And because look, take aside the fact that Joe Biden has made questionable decisions with regard to what he did as vice president. We'll leave aside the fact that he is a known plagiarizer, right? Like, we'll give those things aside. And if we just looked at his role as a legislator, and what he accomplished, was he better than average? We don't know. We just have no idea. I mean, I would submit that nobody should be surprised that Joe Biden screwed up the Afghanistan withdrawal, because every withdrawal he's been involved with has been chaos
Yeah.
and been screwed up. So at some point you're like, hey, your ELO rating is 8 out of
Yeah.
30,000. You know, you're not the guy for this job. Maybe you're a guy for another job. Maybe you're great at something else, but you, Susan Rice, Milken, Miley, Austin, you guys have all had your shot more than once. It's time to go. And let's get somebody else who actually has some proficiency at this. And look, include whatever Republicans you want in that mess too. I'm just, these are the guys in charge right now, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at not Susan Rice, but I'm really critical of her too because she got a lot of crap wrong. When you get crap wrong, you're not supposed to be able to continue to get crap wrong. We're like just to go, hey, you need to go do something else. This think tank, we don't want you. Go reinvent yourself. How many people have worked at a corporation where they got forced to reinvent themselves because somebody else made a decision about something that had nothing to do with them? And you're like, we're cutting these people from this line and below. They have to go reinvent themselves. I'm positive that all those people can do that. They're smart enough to do it. And it frustrates me that people that continue to get crap wrong at an international global scale that costs people's lives.
Yeah.
That it's not clear that, hey, Secretary Austin's not capable of doing this job. Sorry, Secretary Austin, you've got to go. It's just, it frustrates me to no end, man. Because seeing this whole thing burn down, look, I know you weren't surprised. It wasn't surprised. No. When they said they were doing this, I'm like, oh, here we go. Here comes the atrocity.
I didn't think it would be weeks. I mean, I did think it would be within a year. I didn't think the government would last a year. But I didn't think it would be weeks either. My guess was more like 6 months, something like that, 6 to 9. But I mean, because Najibullah, when the communists were there and the Taliban came in, he lasted several years, surrounded. But I mean, Kabul is an island, and a couple other places were able to maintain some semblance of a micro government for a while, and I figured that would probably be the case for another 6 to 9 months. But yeah, I mean, when your Air Force takes off and flies away and leaves the country, and the United States says we're not providing air cover or any other services, I mean, it's and this goes to another question too, which I don't know what you think about this, Pete, but I tend to be a small government guy writ large. At the same time, there is a role for government, and it's important. And I think really deeply thinking about where it's important, where it's not important is a big deal. In the international, domestically too, but internationally specifically, we got bases. You and other listeners may have heard this argument. It's like, well, we can't just be there forever in the forever wars. Like that label of forever wars is such a intentionally divisive. You can't say forever wars without it implying that that's abnormal. That's an aberration. That's not the normal case. What we're doing now, which is fighting forever, is not normal. And I think anybody who is a student of history knows, in fact, the periods of peace are what's abnormal. That's a rarity when peace occurs. And so we should, enjoy that when we have it. But make no mistake, that's not going to last because it's never done.
And is Korea a forever war? And is Germany a forever war? We've got troops in Italy. Is that a forever war? You know?
And then the same thing. And I mean, look, I am a big believer that the China issue is a real deal. I've fought this for 25 years. So repositioning forces and reallocating the percentages that are where and the way that the numbers of troops versus weapon systems and how those things are employed and getting aligned with what should have been aligned 30 years ago. Yeah, I think that's it's time to do some of those realignments. But that's different than saying, well, like 2,500 guys in some air cover. Come on, that's pennies in the bucket for the capacity to have some stability there. And people talk about the money. The amount of money that we're going to spend right now getting just the evacuees out, the amount of money that we had in the military equipment that's been lost. Like, I'm no mathematician, but there is a point of clear inflection where the bang for the buck for the small amount that's there, the residual is like you're better to keep adding a few pennies every year to maintain what you've done and potentially improve it than you are to just lose all of it.
And to draw the enemy's attention to Afghanistan as opposed to Kansas City, because I know the guy that built part of this strategy, this last phase of it with the 2,500. And those guys, I'm not going to undermine what they were doing, but they weren't getting killed. This
Yeah.
idea that they were in the middle of a civil war is it's just not accurate.
Yeah.
And if that's what the president thinks, because that's what he said, then again, you're not the right guy for the job.
Yeah.
How do you justify leaving in that case in the way you did? You're the boss. You can pick leaving, and you can pick leaving how he did. It's certainly his prerogative, but
Well,
there's a cost.
what do you think about this? I mean, I would argue that even if you do view it as, I would argue whether you think of it as a civil war or not, in a sense, doesn't even matter, because even if it is, we support people in civil wars, one side or the other, all the time, right?
All the time.
Yeah, I have to. I mean, you can.
How many civil wars did we get involved in the former Yugoslavian states? All of them.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, what you want to do is you're supporting one side, so it in fact conquers the other, and then can peacefully and absorb it. That's the goal. I mean, that's what happened in our own civil war, right? This is the nature of these things. And so, in other words, what I'm saying is that line of logic of, well, it's a civil war, so therefore we need to bounce. I don't think that holds water. This doesn't mean there couldn't be other reasons to say we need to leave, but I don't think that's a sound rationale.
Well, look at Joe Biden's rationale in general, right? I'm going to attack him for a second. He is a guy who's a proponent of a two-state solution in Palestine and Israel. Okay, recognize Palestine. You're the boss. All you got to do is say, we now recognize Palestine. But he doesn't.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to divide Iraq into three pieces. And he said that we were abandoning our allies in Kurdistan. Then recognize Kurdistan.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do it. Or are you just full of shit?
Yeah.
And he's been full. And this is why I'm so hard on him, because you say these things, they matter. And if you're not going to get them right at all, and I'm not saying there needs to be a Kurdistan, I'm not saying there needs to be a Palestine recognition, but he just
you
wants
have
to
that power.
He has the power. He can do that right now, and then they would be recognized. That would be it. But because he doesn't take these things, he doesn't understand how to get them done. He's a terrible foreign policy, and now that foreign policy is going to affect our domestic policy, and he's going to. It impacts all of the politics here, and makes it harder to make our country a more stabilized, better place. It draws from our stability bank.
I'll tell you, this is the first time in my life, and I'm a cold when it comes to geopolitics. Okay, I very strongly separate my thoughts and feelings. Where I can be crying inside and just feel horrible about a situation, but by God, if Old Yeller has to die, you shoot him in the head. Like, that's just how it goes, right? Right. Doesn't mean I don't feel, but it means I very much separate those two things, because that's essential to do these, to live in it. If you're a security person, like, you can't have those be the same. So for me, it's understandable. You could say emotionally about a lot of these issues and what needs to happen. But the cold reality and the hard decisions about what they are and what you're going to do, man, you got to make those, and you got to just own it and do it. And I will say this about Joe. I mean, as much as this is the first time I've been embarrassed by my country.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's not things that we haven't done that I don't like, right? But this is the first time where both my thoughts and my feelings are ashamed of something that our country did. And you could argue about whether we should have withdrawn or not, but there's no question the way that was done, both leaving Bagram in the middle of the night, and then this happening this way with zero preparation, even though you knew it ahead of time for a long time, right? I mean, you could literally go down and mark out at least 8, but probably more like a dozen decisions in that train wreck that I could go, this is the only time in my life when I've been not ashamed to be an American. I don't mean that at all. I mean ashamed of the actions that my country did and having to apologize to other people for something that my country did.
Yeah.
And maintains that policy. That's embarrassing and humiliating. It's like having when you have your uncle, right? Your young uncle who's like the I don't know, just the stereotypical, like the uncle who's the child molester or whatever, and you're like, God, this person who's my family just did this like horrific thing, and I feel embarrassed and ashamed, not for something that I did, but I feel embarrassed for something we, right, the collective, like my family, we're a part of this. This is our country. We did this, and I've got to go now apologize to these people for something that's just horrific. And that's where we're at. So that's a big reason why, obviously, I and thousands of others are trying to help as many Afghans as we can, despite U.S. government policy.
Right.
Frankly,
Yeah.
I mean, the only reason that this is what's so laughable about the situation, right, is that individual ex-military and intel guys and other folks, right, not just the military. There's some civilians doing it too. People trying to help Christians get out because the Taliban, wants to slaughter them too, right? There's lots of thousands of people who are working to try to get around the debacle of U.S. policy because it's designed to not help do what it should do. And that's atrocious and embarrassing. And it's an indictment of the system.
It's shameful. It's shameful.
It is.
Yeah, and we can go on and on about that, but the point here is we're kind of talking basically about the overall Afghanistan situation, and it's this mix of multiple problems. Like you said, among those dozen or so problems is surprise to your allies, your coalition partners. Hey, we're leaving. And they're like, can we get an extra couple of, nope, we're leaving our timeline. And I don't want to get back into it, but to say that you were stuck with the deal that you had, we put 25,000 people, a division in Washington, D.C., because we were afraid of an insurrection or whatever was going to happen. Okay, fine. Put 25,000 people in Afghanistan and say, we're glad to leave. And everybody's going to be inside of our circle. We're going to make our circle smaller until the last guy gets in an airplane and leaves. I'm simplifying the process, but we put 25,000 people in Washington, D.C. You're telling me that you couldn't change the deal?
Yeah.
Then we got the wrong guy in charge.
Every administration, no matter Republican or Democrat, right, is notorious for changing the deal the previous administration made.
Yeah.
So the idea that all of a sudden you go, well, sorry, I got to do what Trump did.
Yeah.
How did that work on their southern border? Did you say, sorry, we got to do what Trump did down there? No, he did what he wanted to do and made his changes, like every administration does. So that is it's not just weak. It's beyond weak. It's a pathetic excuse for why you had to follow it. And that's one of the things I think well, anyway, it's just pathetic.
It is pathetic.
I'm totally unimpressed. I will tell you this too, though. And leadership is hard, right? And this is one of the problems with electoral politics. True leadership is anybody, who everybody's been a worker and everybody's ever actually led. Like, you can see good leadership when it's there, and after a while you start taking it for granted, and you can easily see bad leadership, right? Just pathetic. With electoral politics, people pick the guy at the top, and then he points the National Security Council on. So, the people that the people actually get to pick are the president and Congress. And unfortunately, like, Congress didn't get a chance to decide how this went down. It's literally the president, one person, your vote. And, I would hope that, and again, this is not partisan politics at all. If a Republican did this in this way, I would say the same thing. This is just so bad to me that it's hard for me in any way to see how anyone could argue that impeachment's not a thing here. And again, that's not specifically to him because he's a Democrat or anything. I would say that with a Republican as well. Equally hard. In fact, probably harder, because this would be my own party that I tend to agree with the party doing it. I can't get over the fact that this has been this way. It's
the Secretary
and
of
lack
Defense,
of accountability.
The Secretary of Defense had to stand in front of the TV and say, I don't know how many Americans are there, and I have no ability to protect them. If that's not an impeachable offense for a president based upon his decision, I don't. That's more than a high crime or misdemeanor. This is something this is a problem, and I would submit that it's worse than Watergate. Watergate was terrible, but it was political. This has caused multiple ethnic cleansing situations. It's put in jeopardy Americans, French citizens. I mean, and I'm saying the French over and over again, but they have people there that are still stuck there, because of his decision to leave and the way it was handled. So if that's not criminal, what is?
You think about this is the interesting about the double, it's not even double standard, different standard that we hold different kinds of leadership to, right? And I'm not saying one's, without even saying actually which one is right or wrong, just pointing out the distinction. That is, you look at when the horrible thing that happened, right, with the gal, Brianna, I believe was her name, in Kentucky, right, in Louisville, that got shot on the drug raid by the police officer. Now, the chief of police or other people, there's always, oh, they need to resign, or they're getting somebody to resign who wasn't even in a meaningful chain of command. Like, these are policies that have been set overall about general policing and the training order. And this person, right, in the general way, certainly the military works, right, and the police works, is if it happened under your command, whether it's you were actually responsible or not, you were replaced. Like, that's just part of it, because it's under your watch. Like, you're responsible for what happens under your watch. Yeah. And even when in some cases you shouldn't be, you still are. And what's crazy to me is we're not talking about one person dying in an accidental shooting, but you don't have people rioting in the streets and going crazy about what's happening when you're talking about thousands of people and a half dozen that I've personally seen get their throats slit. I mean, we're talking night and day of the implications and the difference. You're talking about how many Americans just died at the gate, plus other Afghans that were there, right, on this, because of these kinds of decisions. Like, this is significant. I mean, it's very serious. And the fact that that's not the outrage is not, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's there. You've seen his polls, popularity or whatever, tank. But that's very different than, and I'm a little surprised Congress itself, right, isn't calling more for, of course, they own both houses, right? But the Democrats do. But even Democrats, like, this should not be a partisan issue, really. This is a question of leadership and not relying on expert advisors. And if you did have the expert advisors, you picked the wrong ones. Either way, it's an forgivable, but you can't stay. Right? Yeah. You got to go somewhere else. I don't want you in charge anymore. Like, I've totally lost confidence in the capacity. I didn't have much to begin with, I'll be fair, but I totally lost confidence. Of course, this is true, I would say, across the board. I mean, I've in general, after 20 years of war, become, the people who can actually lead are very, very few, and the rest are just kind of taking up space and promoted by a pyramid that pushes
mediocrity to the top. That's really what it is. All right, let me wrap this thing up. Stand by.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.